The Entrepreneur's Library, episode 160.
Welcome to the Entrepreneur's Library,
the only book-centric podcast that reviews all the top-selling business books and shares authors' perspective firsthand. This is your resource to finding the next great book
that will enable you to grow personally and professionally.
Welcome your host, Wade Danielson.
Thank you for joining us on the EL. Today we have Jez Humble, author of Lean Enterprise. Welcome, Jez, and thank you for joining us on the Entrepreneur's Library.
Thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Before we take a deep dive into your book, Lean Enterprise, will you take just a moment to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about you personally?
Sure. So I am a vice president at Chef. I'm a lecturer at UC Berkeley, and I wrote before Lean Enterprise the award-winning book Continuous Delivery. My background is in software engineering, and I've worked in multiple industries, in multiple companies, helping organizations get better at delivering high-quality, valuable software products.
Perfect. So just first of all, thank you for sharing that. And now let's take the time. Let's jump right into your book, Lean Enterprise, How High-Performance Organizations Innovate at Scale, which was made available not that long ago. As of this record, January 3rd is what I'm showing as far as what you were saying, the hard copy of this year, 2015. So right. Only a couple weeks out. And just, we're going to move quickly, but we're going to cover the top questions that our listener slash future reader would like to get answered. And the first one is, what was the inspiration behind writing Lean Enterprise?
So my background is in helping organizations build high-quality software products. And I was one of the people who pioneered the idea of continuous delivery, and I was involved in the DevOps movement. And really this movement was about how to make it cheap and low risk to release small incremental changes to users, which is something you can only really do with software-based products. With hardware products, you need to actually build the thing, mass manufacture it, ship it. You can't be very iterative about it, but software has these great qualities that you can build a small increment that might only be valuable to a small group of people, get their feedback, and then iterate. And continuous delivery was about making it economic to work in small batches and iterate. And what I found was that this was very popular in some quarters, but large companies found it really hard to adopt this. They were just not geared to working in short incremental cycles, trying ideas out on small parts of the target audience and getting feedback and iterating. And really, Lean Enterprise is about how you create organizations which are able to do this, to work in short development cycles, build products or prototypes of products rapidly and get feedback. And that requires us to change the way we think about portfolio management, financial management, governance, culture, and pretty much everything, even HR. All these things need to be a bit different in order to be able to compete, frankly, in this world where we have these very short product cycles.
So, Jez, I was just speaking with Jay Papasan, co-author of The One Thing, and he talked about there's roughly 9,000 books that come out in a year on business alone. And so this next question is really to help differentiate yourself or differentiate your book from those others that are out there. So what makes your book different from others regarding the same or similar topic?
Well, I don't think anyone has really written a book that really talks about how to transform enterprises, large, medium and large organizations that need to be able to win at creating digital products in particular in this environment where you have these very short product cycles, and particularly about the cultural change that needs to happen. There's books about how to change culture. There's books about leadership. There's books about software development. There's obviously the Lean Startup book. But there's no book that really ties all those things together in the context of building digital products for large enterprises and all the various pieces you need to tie together to make it work in that context.
Very good. So how did you design the book as far as how would you suggest the reader engage with it? Can they jump in and jump out as needed, cherry picking information? Or did you really design it to be read from front to back?
Well, I actually designed my last book to be cherry pickable, and I got a lot of flack for that because it ended up being quite long and there was quite a lot of repetition. So this book is super dense. Me and my co-authors, Joanne Molesky, Barry O'Reilly, have really picked all the various pieces you need to tie together, summarize them, synthesize them into a whole. And so, it packs in just under 300 pages, but it's very, very dense. It includes case studies. It includes a little bit of theory. But really, you should be able to get the core ideas from the preface and the first two chapters, part one of the book. That really introduces the core foundations and theoretical underpinnings and a couple of the case studies that underlie the whole book. And the rest of it, I think, to some extent, you should be able to dip in to where you particularly find yourself interested in the material.
Perfect. So, Jez, now that we know the purpose, the background behind the book, let's take a deep dive into the content itself. We take the next 5 to 8 minutes and really give our listener and future reader a great idea of what they're going to get out of your book.
Great. So we start off really by talking about the fact that a lean enterprise, this idea of an organization which is both very resilient and very adaptable, which is able to move fast at scale, detect weak signals in the market and adapt. That primarily is the result of creating a human system, a result of culture. And even though the book's about technology and how to work in the domain of technology, the point of technology is really to enable humans to collaborate and cooperate more effectively and more rapidly and more productively. And so really all this is about creating human systems. That's at the heart of this. And in an enterprise context, it becomes really difficult because you've got a large number of people with a wide variety of backgrounds, probably distributed across many regions of the world, who all have to work together in order to achieve a common purpose. And so how do we actually do that rapidly at scale? And so the answer to that, interestingly, comes from military doctrine. Often kind of lean, adaptive, agile enterprises are contrasted to command and control. But in fact, command and control has not been popular as a military doctrine since Napoleon defeated the Prussian army in the 19th century. Napoleon's much smaller, less well-trained forces destroyed the Prussian army's very plan-driven, highly orchestrated, well-trained group of soldiers, basically by being able to adapt more rapidly to changing circumstances on the ground. And it's that capability, the ability of individuals within the organization to make decisions that are correct systemically at a global level with limited information and limited context. That's what is going to allow large organizations to be able to compete with startups. And so the book is primarily about how you do that, how you create alignment at scale, how you enable everyone in the organization to make the best decision from the organizational point of view, despite their limited knowledge. The second chapter dives into the product cycle and the product development cycle. And there's a number of well-known models for the enterprise portfolio. Obviously, Geoffrey Moore's theories about crossing the chasm and technology adoption. This idea that products are initially adopted by a very small proportion of people, and if those ideas prove successful, whether in fact those are product ideas or even methodologies, ideas on how to do things, process, any kind of idea or innovation, if those are successful, then they will become more and more popular. But they have to become successful within a short window. Otherwise, the next idea will come along and people will adopt that, and your idea will have fallen into the chasm. It will not have crossed the chasm in time. So this is very important and increasingly important in the modern world where product development cycles are so short. How do we actually balance building products that are validated, that we know people want, versus trying out new ideas for new products? And so this is something that enterprises really need to be able to do. What we find time and time again, I've seen this, I'm sure listeners have seen this. You have a startup, that startup's a small proportion of startups at least are successful. Then either they exit or they get bought by another company. And then it's very hard actually to scale because you need to completely change your behaviors. Rather than doing this very kind of nimble, trying things out, doing things by the skin of your teeth, these kinds of behaviors, they don't work at scale. And enterprises which successfully make that transition often find they lose their ability to be very nimble, to react very quickly, because in order to be able to work at scale, you need to be much more plan-driven and coordinated, and that tends to drive out the kind of very entrepreneurial behaviors that make startups successful. So the second part of this chapter is really about, well, how do we balance those things? And really, you need two completely different management styles and management strategies in order to be able to successfully balance kind of this very scrappy trying out of new ideas and quickly killing the ones that aren't going to be successful that aren't going to attract customers or be quickly adopted, versus the ability to exploit your validated ideas, your products that are making you actually your money and your revenue streams that you're then hopefully reinvesting in exploring new ideas. So those ideas are really the core of the book. That's part one in a nutshell. Part two describes how to work in the explore domain, where we're exploring a number of ideas, knowing that most of them won't be successful. Most ideas are bad, and finding ways to use the principle of optionality, trying out a bunch of different ideas and pivoting rapidly and working successfully in that domain. So that really explores how to adopt the lean startup methodology in an enterprise context. Part three of the book describes how to work in the domain where you have a validated product and you need to actually exploit it to develop it at scale. And really, the key part of exploiting is actually around driving down costs, improving quality, and improving value to customers. And that demands a completely different approach. For that, we need to pursue process improvement, which means enabling the people doing the work to actually try out new ideas, to experiment with new ideas in terms of how to increase quality, how to reduce cost, and creating an organization which enables people to experiment and to try out new things and to learn and get better. That's really the essence of how you build an organization which can continuously improve and get better and better at delivering higher value, higher quality, cheaper and faster. There's a piece on engineering practices, because engineering practices are quite poorly understood. Lots of people have gone into management in large companies, not necessarily really understanding how to work in the digital domain and how to build products where software is a competitive advantage. And so he spends a bunch of time discussing how to do that and how to take an experimental approach to product development. These is inspired by stories from companies like HP. We talk about the HP LaserJet team, which managed to achieve an 8-fold productivity increase, much higher quality and much lower costs for their LaserJet firmware business over the course of a couple of years. We discuss companies like Amazon and Google and how they're able to take an experimental approach to product development. One of my favorite stories from this section is the story of Amazon's shopping cart, which was blogged about by the guy who wrote the prototype. When you go to Amazon and you're going to check out, Amazon actually recommends you products that you might like based on what's in your shopping cart. And this wasn't always in Amazon. This was the idea of one of the people working on the checkout team. And so he knocked up a prototype and went to show a senior vice president of products his prototype. And the VP of product said, "Don't build this. It's going to distract people from checking out. They're going to abandon their cart and it's going to reduce revenue." And so this engineer went back to his desk, basically said, "I don't believe you," and took his prototype and deployed it into production so that a small percentage of Amazon's users would actually see his prototype, and then measured the impact on revenue. And what he found was that revenue was massively increased as a result of this recommendations functionality. He took the data back to the VP and said, "Well, listen, my data shows that actually this is going to have a big impact on revenue." And the VP obviously wasn't very happy about this, but nevertheless said, "Well, the data's right. You should go ahead and build this out and release a fully featured version of it." And so this, I think, really is the essence of creating a culture where people are able to experiment and try out new ideas and perform small-scale experiments that are in the interest of the company. You need to create a culture where people can do that. And, as an exercise for readers in your company, is it even possible that an engineer could, against the express wishes of a VP, try and experiment out, put the experiment out there, get the data, and then prove the VP wrong and not be fired, but in fact be encouraged to continue? And that really is a cultural thing. And so that's what the last part of the book is about. It's about how do you create a culture of innovation. As an enterprise, you can't afford to hire the top of market people who have exactly the skills and behaviors that you want. You have to invest in developing your people. So there's a whole section on growing a culture of innovation rather than taking shortcuts like acqui-hiring or innovation labs, how to actually invest in developing your people and creating a culture of innovation. We talk about governance, risk and compliance and how to take a lean approach to those. Lots of large companies, financial services and so forth, find it harder to adopt these kinds of ideas because of governance and compliance and auditing concerns. and we show how to marry those ideas. We talk about financial management and how you can do budgeting, avoiding the plague of the annual budget cycle and the terrible effects that has on innovation, how to do IT in a way that it creates a competitive advantage rather than being a cost center. And then finally, how to get started using a case study from the UK government digital service, which transformed the way that the UK government delivered digital services to citizens. That's a high-level picture of the book and what we talk about.
So Jez, you did a fantastic job of taking us through and giving us a deep dive into what we can expect from the book. And now we're going to take it a level deeper and ask you that if the reader could want to take away one concept, principle, or action item out of your entire book, everything you just discussed with us, what would you want that to be?
I think for me, the real epiphany of the book is the idea of taking the scientific method and adopting it for product development and for process improvement. So this idea that the way that you innovate is you have audacious goals. You have a mission to benefit your customers. You don't know how to get there, and you can't know how to get there. So what you've got to do is create a hypothesis, design an experiment to test that hypothesis, gather the data, and then learn how to get better. And that's the way you develop great products. It's the way you develop the capabilities of your people. It's the way that you do process improvement. That scientific method is at the heart of all the different parts of what makes a truly great lean enterprise a high-performance organization.
So, Jez, there's been a lot of quote-worthy stuff that you've already discussed in this interview so far, and that actually leads into our next question, which is, do you have a favorite quote from your book, and will you take a second to explain it, what it means?
That's a great question. I think, I actually have quotes at the beginning of every chapter, and some of them I'm very pleased with. One of them, chosen by my co-author, Joanne Molesky, is a quote from Nietzsche. It says, "All things are subject to interpretation. Whichever interpretation prevails at a given time is a function of power and not truth." And actually, I subsequently discovered that Nietzsche didn't say this, in fact, but he may as well have said it. And it's a great quote anyway. And I think in the spirit of full disclosure, we often think that the way that things work is just the way they are, or that something can't be done. And I think that's the first attitude that we have to attack if we're going to be able to succeed. And this needs to be attacked at every level, from the management level, from the level of middle management to the people who are doing the work on the ground. Things are the way they are because of power structures and existing ways of being, not because it's the only way to do things. You need to challenge the idea that it has to be the way that it is now. And we have to make it safe to try new things and to fail at new things in order to be able to get better. This idea that, you're going to do something, and if you fail, it's not acceptable, and so it's high risk. You've got to make it low risk to experiment with new ideas and new ways of doing things, and we have to accept that the way things are is not a function of the best way to do things, because the best way to do things is changing all the time in the current age. And so I guess there's one more quote which I'd like to give you from Taiichi Ohno. Taiichi Ohno says, whether top management, middle management, or the workers who actually do the work, we're all human. So we're like walking misconceptions, believing that the way we do things now is the best way. Or perhaps you don't think it's the best way, but you're working within the common sense. We can't help it. This is how things are. That's not the case. There's always going to be obstacles to getting better. The key is to treat those as obstacles to be overcome, not as objections to try new things.
Excellent. Very powerful quote. So thank you for sharing both of those. And Jez, this wouldn't be a book-centric podcast if I didn't ask you for a book recommendation. So if there was only one book you could recommend to our listeners based on the way that it's impacted your life, maybe created a paradigm or a lifestyle shift, what would you recommend? So
the book that I think inspired me most in the writing of this book was a book by Mike Rother called Toyota Kata. And Mike Rother is a guy who studied Toyota for many years, and he wrote a great book, the book on value stream mapping, Learning to See. And that book talks about how you become a manager at Toyota and how you actually pursue the scientific method of process improvement and employee development It's a fascinating book. It won a Shingo Prize. I found it very, very inspiring and very powerful.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that recommendation. And just before we depart, can you recommend the best way for our listeners to not only get more information on you, but also your book, Lean Enterprise?
Sure, absolutely. So you can go to my site, continuousdelivery.com, and there you'll find a link to the book. And I'll post for readers a link to an excerpt. You can actually download an excerpt from O'Reilly.com. So if you go to O'Reilly.com and look for the book, there's a free excerpt that you can download that includes a couple of chapters for free, so that you can get an idea of what it is you might be getting yourself into.
Excellent. Well, Jez, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your book with us.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you'd like more information on Jez or his book, Lean Enterprise, check out the show notes at the elpodcast.com.
Looking for your next book idea?
Head over to the elpodcast.com,
where Wade shares his amazing resource, the top 10 business books recommended by over 500 entrepreneurs, with you for free.
That's the elpodcast.com.
Till the next time, keep it on the EL.